Markets around the world are heading into overdrive, if they haven't already. We're seeing some absolutely ginormous moves in many of these markets, and several of them are hitting new all-time high records. I want to answer this question in today's video as well. What happens at the end of the cycle if Bitcoin is due to top in late 2025, yet the cycle continues on potentially for another couple of years? So let's try and answer that today for you as we study the past to forecast the future. I do appreciate each and every one of you guys have been tuning in for the last several years, maybe even just the last several days. And if you are one of the ones in the last several days, thank you very much. Huge shout out to all you guys here in the top geographies as well as the minorities as well. Let's of course move on with the video, but I will just point out the links in the top of the video description are for our free TIA report. The free 7-day trial of the TIA Gann Swing Indicator is something that I'll be using in today's video. And of course, if you want to get trading on Bybit, BitGet, there's also a Palau ID card that helps you out with your KYC needs. Moving on, the big things that are happening around the globe are new fresh prices. Yes, we've seen that before, but we're even getting some new all-time high prices, some new highest weekly closes in history for US stock markets. I know that this is a crypto and Bitcoin. We like to focus on that a lot, but we need to understand what happens in the macro space because we need to get the risk on extremely hot so that we can see the massive pumps that we want to see in Bitcoin and cryptos. And of course, there have been some significant gains in cryptocurrencies, but I think there are going to be even bigger gains as well as these markets continue to heat up. Now, we've been covering this for a long time. You know the masses, they've been calling for major collapses and depressions and all sorts of mega breakdowns, in particular through the breakdowns of 2020, or they're looking for prices to break down from 2020. It hasn't happened. I highly doubt now at this stage that it will happen, as I doubted those breakdowns back in March when things were really bearish around the world. We got a massive higher low. Another one happened in October, and who would have guessed just 7 weeks later we would be breaking to new fresh highs and just 3% underneath the old all-time high from January 2022. So nearly 2 years have passed and we are getting very close to that all-time high. Now, we may expect some sort of pullback somewhere. Of course, I don't have that answer. My answer to the overall structure is that we've got higher lows and will potentially continue to go up, obviously, until we find some resistance, and we can only look back at history as to where this particular resistance would be. And the market basically just held up for a couple of weeks here underneath the highs of March 2022 and July, and then swiftly broke out of it, giving us our highest weekly close in 2023 for the S&P 500. Now, the Nasdaq also did the same thing. It's our highest weekly close in 2023, and it puts it 2.8% away from a new all-time high. This is super critical stuff, as we'll see in a moment when I get to what happens at the end of the cycle. We're looking at these Bitcoin accumulations and bull markets as well. I know we've been doing pretty well over the course of the last couple of years to get on the right side of this market, as you guys have been pointing out in the comments section, because at the time, at those extremes, at least here on the channel, I get absolutely ridiculed at the bottom, saying that you don't understand that there's a recession and inflation and interest rates and sure, all that sort of stuff. I get it. But if we put our money where our mouth is, we need to put it into the markets, or at least if we want to make money because we're here as investors and traders, then that stuff meant absolutely jack all. The chart continued up. You're going to make money from that. So the ridiculing is the big one I want to bring up here. And just looking at some of these lows that came into the market where I was saying, look, I think this is probably the bottom, at least in the recent history here, that this could be the bottom. And it was much cleaner on the Nasdaq than it was on the S&P. And I'm never going to get at that exact perfect point at the bottom. But when we look back now, you think, actually, that wasn't such a bad area to be buying up for the move higher, as was March and the low here, and even June, where I was looking at this being a potential bottom, but potentially needed a little more time. It doesn't look that bad, even though the market went under, and you look forward 6 to 12 months, that's the times you want to be in. So in terms of the ridicule, that will happen again as the markets head up, and it might look like that they can never go down again, but they will go down again. And I might be thinking this is looking a little bit unsafe to keep piling into the market. And again, the ridicule will come up saying, you've got to be joking. This market there's so much more strength here. Look at the data, yada, yada. There's always going to be something that tells us that they have to keep going up. Now, there is the flip side to that, because these markets can keep going up for a lot longer than we expect them to, but we just have to continue to follow the chart and look at the macro structures here. And yes, there are going to be some sort of false signals as well. It does get a lot trickier when the markets break into higher prices. So I wanted to bring that up as a bit of a disclaimer as we start to head into higher prices, because if we look around the world, as I posted on Twitter as well, some of these markets are in all-time high territories, and this is where things get a little bit crazier. The reason being is majority of people missed out on buying the low. The lows, I think, at least are the easiest times to be getting into the market. I talk a lot about this with our members in TIA Premium, you know where the links are in the video description, because we go into a lot more detail about how to pick these bottoms. So if you are interested in learning how to read the markets for your own trading and investing, then definitely check out TIA Premium. Links are in the video description. Now for the Dow, we have continued up. It is now only 0.5% away from a new all-time high price. And like I said in the intro, this is now the highest weekly close in history. The Dow's just done a highest ever. So basically an all-time high weekly close. If you throw this thing onto a line chart, well, you've got the highest closing price ever. So I think it's obviously, you've got to be a fool to think that this is not going to make it to a new all-time high. If you believe it won't make it to a new all-time high, let me know in the comment section. I know I've debated a lot with some people on Twitter, Twitter Spaces over the months, saying that they think the market is going to collapse and they're forever bearish and completely off the game there. So that's the big call here. The ridicule will happen in reverse as well at the other extreme, but the markets can keep going up that extra bit higher than what we anticipate them to. So let's not try and get too bearish too soon as they break out into new all-time highs. This is precisely what I'm talking about. I finally got this post up here. So if you guys want to go ahead to Twitter and bookmark this, make sure you keep this as a massive guide. I think we are heading up into the winner's curse phase in the next couple of years. Typically this sort of peak, we're expecting it to be roughly around this period here, 2025, 2026 for land value, so real estate and the economic cycle. They might start to top, and from that point, you would start to see a lot of things begin to unfold in the economy. We're going to continue to follow up this, which is why I say subscribe to the channel, or if you want to do more with your own trading, investing, TIA Premium is the go-to. It's in the description down below. So this next one coming, the next collapse coming, will be the big one. That's what we're anticipating, a major collapse, major recession, bigger than what we saw in 2020. And I mean, 2022 was nothing compared to 2020 and was nothing compared to 2008. Potentially something similar to 2008 where we have this major, major collapse. It can always be wrong, and maybe it's not as severe. That's an issue too, but this is the roadmap. It's been working, as I said here, for over 200 years. I'm not willing to throw this out just yet. And this is the period we're going into, going to see some major crazy gains and the ridicule to the upside. So continuing on with the rest of the stock markets around the world. Yesterday I came to you and showed you that these markets were heading into fresh highs, and they've continued to do so, closing out the week now in fresh highs. This time going all the way back at a 16-year high for the top 50 stocks in Europe, 22% away from a new all-time high price. That is a nice uptrend heading to fresh higher prices. Continuing on, the French market now 0.7% away from a new all-time high. For the Canadians, you guys are now 9% away from a new all-time high, also putting in higher lows. Who else can I give a shout out to? Germany, new all-time high prices again. Now you are 1.4% into a new all-time high price. So the markets, they just keep shooting up here. All right, this is what I posted yesterday on Twitter. It's basically just going to be some updates here. I still, obviously, am going to get to the Bitcoin breakout and what this all means for BTC, but I'm going to keep updating this on Twitter as well. It's so interesting to see how the global economies are doing with their stock markets in particular compared to what they tell us in the news. And yes, I always hear the same thing. but it's inflation. Yes, it is inflation this time around, but inflation is going down. And also, what else would you do with your money? Who cares if it's inflation? Who cares the reason that it's going up? If you keep your money on the sideline, well, you're losing out to inflation anyway. So it's just a stupid reason, in my opinion. So moving on from all of this stuff and looking at the overall cycle here as we head into the winner's curse, it is showing up massively on the home builders ETF. The smart money is telling us there are more profits to come in the home builders throughout America. Home builders have broken to a new all-time high, and now they are 2% into a new all-time high price. They were stronger coming out of the 2022 low, and I put that tweet up on Twitter back in December 2022 saying that this was essentially the bottom of the market because of what we're anticipating that was going to come next. It is now into a new all-time high price, and previously it peaked before the stock market peaked. So the home builders index peaked in 2006. The stock market peaked in October 2007. So we come down to October, it's somewhere around here. And you can see the home builders were already down for some time. So if you've ever wondered what is this 18.6 year cycle and why this number here might not line up with the stock market, that is your reason. Because they'll start to see, or at least the smart money will potentially see, that there are not going to be the same sort of gains that there once was. But the masses are going to think there are the gains because that's all they've seen for the last year or two, which is why it's called a winner's curse phase, because you get blindsided by what you're seeing. There's a lot to come. There's a lot of things I don't have the answer for. However, this is what we are continuing to do week after week in our group live streams with TIA premium members. So that is our home builders ETF showing us new all-time high prices. Bitcoin, 2 days to go until we get a weekly close. Now that we've closed out Friday, we could potentially stay above the 50% level here at $42,000. Like we looked at in yesterday's video, we have seen Bitcoin stay above on the weekly close above its 50% level, 1, maybe 2 weeks, and then get rejected. So these tops take some time to play out. And this is going to be super important when I get to Sol in just a minute. There are a lot of people who are a little bit angry that I keep dissing Sol as if it was their wife that I'm talking about. Get your head out of your ass and just focus on what the charts are doing. So I'm going to get to that in just a moment. I do love them. They're going to go up again. They're going to give us all of the sweet, sweet gains. Anyway, BTC, you can see that it takes several weeks here. If we just count it going up from this last big boom bar here in June to where the breakdown bar was, gave us 14 weeks. Call it 3 or so months. So is this going to take 3 months for it to collapse? Who knows? But we do have a few more, probably about 4 weeks to go until these ETFs start to get some answers. So maybe we stick around up here for the next 4 weeks. Maybe we head a little higher. What does it matter? A lot of the gains have been made now. We've been up for 8 straight weeks, and it's possibly a time that some are taking a little bit of profits, which is why it might hang out at these levels. And there is a lot of interest now in the markets, which means those buyers are coming through, trying to scoop up their cheap BTC after missing out down here because their favorite YouTubers were telling them that the market is going to go down to 12K or it's going to go down to 9K or 3K, as some crazy people are talking about. It never happened, and that's why we need to continue to follow what the chart's saying, not what our bias or our emotion is telling us. And yes, sometimes we all have a little bit of bias to one direction or the other. We're only human. And what we try to use the charts for are to try and remove that emotion and stick to our plans. So as we can see here, 8 straight weeks up. Eventually these moves do pause or roll over. That's what we're waiting for here. So moving on to the all-time high prices for BTC, also looking at what happens at the end of this cycle. Well, what we've seen in the past, and I've alluded to this before, is during a Bitcoin accumulation, and I'm only measuring this in this instance as Bitcoin being underneath the old all-time high. So just saying that this is from the low until it breaks to a new all-time high. I'm just calling that accumulation for the sake of this particular chart here. What we see is the S&P 500 break to a new all-time high, and then eventually they all go in unison together. So this is the unison part here where the Bitcoin bull market is up, and you can see, at least for the S&P, that it's also up quite substantially, and it basically just goes in one direction. There's not really any sort of choppy period in this last stage. take it back a cycle. You got the accumulation, the bear market, there's choppiness as well. The accumulation also had some choppiness, but there were 2 new all-time highs. But then when Bitcoin went on the bull market in 2017, basically the entirety of 2017, the S&P was just straight up. So that doesn't mean that the S&P stops when Bitcoin stops. You can just see that there is a clean run, at least in those 2 cycles, that the S&P was basically just straight up. Now, if we just throw our swing indicator on here, there was no breaks in the 2-bar swing. Sorry, that's even the 1 bar. So yeah, there was no breaks in that whatsoever for the entire run. Now for the Bitcoin bull here, there was one extremely minor, 2 breaks, but they were very minor breaks, and they did not pass back under the previous monthly swing bottom until the bear market. So it was a nice clean straight move up for the last 2 cycles. There they are there. And then we go back to the last Bitcoin bull in 2013. Also a very clean move to the upside. There was no sort of choppy periods like we saw in the bear market and like you see in the accumulation stage of Bitcoin either. So I've been talking a lot about the Bitcoin bull market and also the bull markets and the new all-time highs for the stock markets. And I suspect we are very close to that now, which is what we've been talking about for the Bitcoin accumulation phase. The S&P will typically hit a new all-time high at least twice. 1, 2, you got 3 in this case here. So the first break, bit of a rejection, another break, another rejection, another break, and then it's on. So typically twice. And then Bitcoin goes on a massive rampage along with everything else out there. Every other asset just goes absolutely ballistic, which is why I came back to this cycle here, the winner's curse stage. That's when everyone thinks this is not going to end. And you will see the ridicule coming back into the market as it may have started. People telling me that the altcoins, you're out of touch and altcoins are going to keep going, blah, blah, blah. It's the same thing. So that's a real possibility that we'll see an all-time high for the stock market. It's just another signal to tell us that the risk is getting extreme. It's starting to build up a lot, and that energy is going to go somewhere. And I suspect it's also going to go into Bitcoin and cryptos. Now, I'm going to answer this particular part in just a moment, but I just want to get onto Sol before we get onto that. Sol and the cryptos, I think they're still going to have a massive explosive move. I think you're still going to see something like this and something like this. Remember, these moves are typically when Bitcoin's in an all-time high stage. So Bitcoin was in an all-time high, or it hit it in November, right around here of 2020. And then the altcoins get this massive boom. But they still get a massive boom before then, and that is confirmation that the risk appetite is coming back into the market. So we have confirmation now. That's all that we need to know about this move. If you got in early and you made some good trading gains off that, great. All the power to you making trading gains. Now you can probably see back here that there was an 80% decline. This makes altcoin holders feel a little better that their move looks like it's closer to all-time highs, but when you look at it in percentages, not really. Anyway, there's a very big gain here from about 50 cents to $5. A 10x, fantastic. You guys have nearly done a 10x if you got in at the low, and it's now at $73. Look what else it's doing. It's hitting a 50% level, and the volume is dropping off. On this next move up, the volume is dropping off. Keep an eye on that. Then if it finally gets a rollover in the coming weeks, last time it did an 80% decline. It went all the way back down to $1. So if this only did a 60% decline from roughly where it is, because it's at the 50% level, well, it takes us back into this green zone, and that's where I'm happy to scoop up some Sol. Long term, I don't care about the project. I don't care about all the other stuff. I just want to make some gains from it, and I want to wait until there is confirmation. You might play it differently. That's absolutely fine, by all means. Anyway, if we get that 60% decline, that is somewhere in the region of a good scoop up in the 20s to roughly in the 40s for Sol. I think it may come back into that zone. Yes, I know the folks who are holding it 50, 60, 70 will say it will never happen. Whatever, doesn't matter. Just need to focus on what the charts are telling us, and maybe one day it will tell us that it will never go back to that price. But for now, there is the possibility that it does have some sort of correction. Now, what if Sol makes it higher? And this goes for all cryptocurrencies. What if it goes even higher? What if it makes it back to the previous monthly lower swing top before it collapsed at around $140? Well, $140, there is your 80% decline right back to the previous resistance, which could then become support. So it could happen almost exactly the same like last time. Maybe it does. And maybe you're in at 70 bucks and it goes to 140. Great. You've taken on a crap ton of risk to make 100% at the end of a move if it actually doesn't do that 100%. So there's a lot of ifs riding on this. That's why I don't like to get in late on these moves, and I like to wait for confirmation, wait for the pullback. We have time as I've gone through here because we're waiting on an all-time high, which then comes across to BTC, which would probably start to die off here as we do hit that all-time high. You know, there's a bit more energy and excitement going into stocks as opposed to what's going on with Bitcoin and crypto. And then you start to get that pullback, and that's where you go, time to get into cryptos, because it's just a matter of time until we go on that explosive move. And this is the one that we all want here, that explosive move for roughly 12-ish months. You can see it happened from the low here in December 2020 to the peak there in November 2021. That is the move that we all want. If you got this move, thumbs up to you. You're doing great. See if you can hang on for the ride and see if you can hang on for a 60 to 80% decline from wherever that peak comes in. Back to the S&P 500 and what happens at the end. Well, the big one, Bitcoin could potentially roll over at that peak. We're looking towards late 2025, as we've talked about before, and then go on a little bit of a bounce, which leaves it as a left-hand translated cycle. So that one there, I think, requires another video. However, I'm going to leave you with this. We're looking at the peak here of 2025, 2026. What if the stock market keeps going and there's more in it because house prices started to roll over, but the stock market, remember what we looked at, the stock market kept going for another 12 months or so, 12 to 15 or so months. What if Bitcoin does it? Well, maybe it hits that 2025 figure that we've got here, rolls over, and then goes on another run to sucker everyone in before it rolls over again. That's when you get your left-hand translated cycle and the market does not come back for another all-time high in the next halving. So this might be the last all-time high that we get for a substantial amount of time for BTC. That's why I've been so adamant to not miss these lows. And whenever this next pullback happens, that is your pullback as well, because potentially that next cycle is not going to play out like each of these other ones. We don't get that nice big pump after the halving to a new all-time high. We might still get a pump, but we might not get that extra move because the rest of the world is recovering from the winner's curse, which leads to a major, major collapse, which lasts roughly 3 to 6 years, as we've seen in the past, which would then mean we do not have the risk appetite for Bitcoin to go up and hit a new all-time high price. More on that in future videos because it is going to be very, very serious. I've talked a lot about the different types of mindsets that come through into trading and investing throughout these ridiculous times that I anticipate based on everything that I've shown you guys for many, many months now. And I suspect that will be the same case as Bitcoin goes to the all-time high, and people will think that it will have to continue happening, but it won't. Like, subscribe, follow us over on Twitter, heaps of updates there. And if you want to get on board with this and learn more about it throughout this journey, TIA Premium is the place to go. Thanks again for getting us very close to 300,000 before the end of the year. Until the next one, take care and peace out.